Funding for the Nashville podcast comes from the Hal Allen Clinic, specializing in minimally invasive robotic spine surgery and laser brain tumor surgery. For 40 years, the neurosurgeons of the Hal Allen Clinic have been national leaders in brain and spine surgery.
This podcast serves Middle Tennessee every weekday morning, and it's made possible by member support. Learn how you can make a difference at WPLN.org/support.
This is the Nashvillager podcast. It's August 11th, 2025. On this day, in 1378, London's Westminster Abbey was desecrated badly enough that the church canceled worship services for 4 months to regroup. The lead-up is a profoundly medieval chunk of history that is quite foreign to our modern sensibilities. It has to do with rules of the time about taking people hostage during battle, which was okay, but only if you followed all kinds of arcane rules. Suffice it to say that a squire named Robert Hawley and his buddy John Shakel really messed it up. They started a diplomatic scandal and made a prince mad. They were thrown in the Tower of London, and then they broke out and ran to Westminster Abbey. Now, they were betting on the custom and religious laws of the time that made churches a true sanctuary, a place where fighting was not allowed, where the powers of state were supposed to take a step back and let the powers of the church preside. Hawley and Shakel assumed it was a safe space where they could not be touched. And at first, that's how it worked out. The royal court sent a letter to the abbot in charge of Westminster asking him to turn the men over. The abbot refused. But on August 11th, an officer from the prison rounded up 50 soldiers and broke into the abbey. That alone was considered sacrilege. But it wasn't the whole story. The troops apprehended Shakel, but Hawley put up a fight, and the soldiers fought back. This was during High Mass, mind you. The fighting moved into the area at the front of the church that's set apart for only the choir and the clergy. And there, in that special area, Hawley and a monk named Richard were killed. The soldiers were excommunicated for violating the sanctuary. And like I said, the grand church itself was closed for 4 months, then rededicated in a special service. To this day, there is a small monument to Hawley in the abbey. Its original brass plate has been lost, but a guidebook from 1600 recorded the inscription, which says, quote, "Alas, oh woe, in my death I sprinkled the faces of the monks with my own blood. The choir is my witness for all time, and now this holy place holds me, Robert Hawley, because it was here that, wronged, I first felt the death-dealing swords." I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. The United States has no laws that make houses of worship the kind of safe space they were during the Middle Ages, but we have long had a cultural expectation that they should be treated that way. Some of that probably stems from generations of Americans reading swashbuckling stories from European history and just sort of internalizing some of the norms. And some of it surely is embedded in our nebulous concepts about keeping church and state separate. If we aren't going to let the government rule over religious practices, then can we really tell churches who they can or can't protect? Well, again, the laws of this country don't bar any law enforcement from going into a religious space and arresting someone who they believe has broken the law. But at times, certain agencies have had internal rules that say it's a bad idea. Now, there's been a lot of concern in recent months over the White House giving ICE agents the okay to go into churches, synagogues, or mosques if that's what it takes to apprehend someone they want to deport. Here in Nashville, the Catholic Diocese issued a statement essentially telling its members that it was okay not to attend church if they were in fear of what might happen to them if they went. Now, so far, I haven't heard of any cases of officers actually entering a worship space to take people. But there have certainly been instances where they waited next to churches attended by immigrants and detained people just outside the building on church property. Now, you may be wondering, if there's no law against it, why was there ever a rule saying ICE shouldn't mess with people at worship? Well, the consensus is just that it's horrible optics, because there is that cultural expectation that certain places are off limits for that kind of activity. Breaking those societal norms can be a recipe for the general public turning on officials in a bad way. Now, there is an example from history of the government grabbing people while they worshiped, and it's an example that happened right here. During the Civil War, when the Union Army was in control of Nashville, the Army repeatedly raided black churches in Nashville to round up people who were then impressed into doing the backbreaking work of fortifying our city. Now, I don't know that there was much outcry at the time in the white community, but I remember the strong feeling of revulsion and shock that I had when historian Bobby Lovett described those raids to me. And whenever I tell somebody about those raids, I see their eyes widen. I hear the intake of breath. As much cruelty as we knew there was for black people in that era, detaining them at church just feels extra hurtful somehow. But at the time, it was very easy for most white people to divorce their ideas of what kind of safety they expected for themselves in their own place of worship and what kind of sanctuary they thought a black church should be able to provide. Last week, after more than a year of tumult and disagreement within the Nashville-based Southern Baptist Convention over the man at the helm of the denomination's public policy arm, Brent Leatherwood stepped down from the position. But the day prior, he had sent a letter to President Trump decrying the decision to allow ICE to enter churches. And that kind of position is exactly why many in the Baptist church had made it clear that Leatherwood was too woke to speak for them. In just a few minutes, award-winning author Kevin Wilson. That's coming up after the newscast.
Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from the Hal Allen Clinic, specializing in minimally invasive robotic spine surgery and laser brain tumor surgery. For 40 years, the neurosurgeons of the Hal Allen Clinic have been national leaders in brain and spine surgery.
Tennessee's legislature has passed a record-breaking number of anti-LGBTQ laws. I'm Mariana Baca-Yao, and as WPLN's Power and Equity reporter, I focus not only on how marginalized communities contend with those new laws, but how they come together in spite of them.
I think what gives me hope is that someone like you is covering this. Because if the overwhelming narrative is one of defeat, how can we have hope?
Listen here on 90.3 WPLN News.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. The man put to death by the state of Tennessee last week was not shocked by an implanted defibrillator, as was feared by his attorneys. That's according to an initial evaluation released Friday. Byron Black had the device because of heart disease. His attorneys argued that the defibrillator needed to be disabled before the execution to avoid unnecessary suffering. But even the hospital that implanted the device refused to turn it off ahead of time and risk a premature death. During the execution on Tuesday morning, Black did lift his head, groan, and cry out in pain. His attorneys say they will be reviewing the autopsy, which should be released in 8 to 12 weeks. In 2013, a Nashville report found ways the justice system could improve for domestic violence victims. WPLN's criminal justice reporter Paige Flager says that a new report celebrates a decade of wins and highlights more opportunities to improve.
Nashville has closed gaps in the justice system, creating the Office of Family Safety, Family Justice Centers, and an advocacy center in the courthouse. It also now requires police to assess the risk of a domestic violence case becoming deadly. These are huge strides, says Diane Lance, director of the Office of Family Safety.
It's really important when you are trying to improve victim safety that you don't forget about offender accountability.
She says that's her office's next priority, holding domestic violence offenders accountable, like by considering their criminal history when bond is set and ensuring they relinquish their guns. While the report is celebratory, some of these wins only came with the budget that passed this summer. So even though the city has known about most of these issues for a decade, it took until this year and the release of this new report to address them. Paige Flager, WPLN News.
The Tennessee Valley Authority is on a fundraising spree. One of the ways the utility can make money is through issuing bonds. And last week they offered bonds for the 5th time this year, raising $5.8 billion. The money will go to refinancing the $23 billion in debt that the utility currently holds and toward building new power plants. And they'll need it, as peak power demands have surged since last summer. A tunnel planned in Nashville by Elon Musk's The Boring Company poses risks for sinkholes. That's because of the city's specific geology. But WPLN's Caroline Eggers reports there's been some misunderstanding of this science, including by a Boring Company executive.
Nashville has what's called karst terrain. Underground, our landscape is largely limestone. Boring Company Vice President David Buss described the rock as hard to Nashville officials last week.
The benefit of all of that hard rock is there's hopefully very little settlement, but we monitor settlement over time.
But this is not accurate. To measure mineral hardness, geologists use what's called the Mohs scale, 1 being soft and 10 being a diamond. Molly Miller, professor emeritus of geology at Vanderbilt University, says
your fingernail is a 2.5.
While limestone starts at 3.
It's not hard. And what makes it tricky is that it is sort of like Swiss cheese.
That's because limestone dissolves, just like salt dissolves in water. So our underground terrain is full of holes and cracks. That's why it's prone to sinkholes. A study by researchers at the U.S. Geological Survey shows that the proposed tunnel area is very vulnerable to sinkholes. But local research is limited. Miller says Tennessee's geology hasn't really been studied in about 50 years.
It's not like the rocks have had MRIs of their stomachs, so we don't really know what's underneath there.
There have been studies on tunneling through karst in other parts of the world, like China, Iran, and Germany. Researchers unanimously urge caution, given the unpredictability of the rock and how water flows through it. A 2012 study in the Arabian Journal of Geosciences described tunneling in karst as, quote, the most hazardous task in civil engineering. Even studies as recently as last year advised careful disaster planning. The Boring Company did not respond to interview requests about how it would approach safety given this geology. Caroline Eggers, WPLN News.
A prominent arboretum in Kentucky is adjusting its conservation plan to accommodate a natural gas pipeline that's being built through a protected woodland. That's the latest in a 6-year battle for Bernheim Forest and Arboretum. The company LG&E began work in April to clear a 1-mile section of the Bernheim property for the pipeline. Bernheim's conservation team says construction presents long-term risks to water quality, endangered species, and erosion. Still, the forest president and CEO Mark Worms tells WKU Public Radio their only option now is to look toward the future.
We're going to try to work with them to ensure as little environmental impact as we can, and it won't ever be forest again, but it could become this beautiful meadow pollinator kind of mix.
LG&E says the pipeline is a necessary response to rapid growth for the Bullock County area, which is growing by more than 1,200 residents a year. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Local award-winning author Kevin Wilson has deep Tennessee roots. He grew up in Franklin County, attended Vanderbilt, and today teaches writing at Sewanee, the University of the South. Earlier this year, he released his latest novel, Run for the Hills. Like much of his work, the story considers the sometimes unexpected ways family can come to be. Wilson is the author of 7 books total, one of which was made into a feature film. WPLN's Cynthia Abrams sat down with Wilson on our daily show, This Is Nashville, to talk about why he does what he does.
Why do you write fiction? Why do you see it as an important art form in today's world?
That's a great question. I mean, and again, I hate to say it, but maybe if I wasn't a kid growing up in the middle of nowhere with no real access to stuff, maybe I would have become a filmmaker. Like maybe if I had been able to rent cameras from a film society, and maybe if I grew up with a lot of people that wanted to like do that collaboratively, my whole life changes. But the thing that I knew I could do on my own and I didn't have to ask anybody to do it or help me was fiction and making that stuff. And I never gravitated to nonfiction because I don't trust my memory and I don't also like reality. I wanted to live in a fictional world, and I also just really feel like I can put all the true things into my fiction, but I still get to call it fiction. So what's the problem? Why would I care about it? And I just still think that storytelling and fictional stories are important. They appeal to the human part of us that responds emotionally to wanting to place ourselves in the lives of somebody who is not us. And that's hugely important. And I think like the things that I tend to love are where I forget myself, even though I am recognizing that this is invented or made up or not real. The kind of one of the loveliest things for me is to say, sure, it's not real, it's made up, someone invented this, and yet my heart is pounding. And yet I love this character so much that it means the world to me to find out if they make it or not. And I don't know, it's like something magical to me that when I go back into the real world, I feel transformed and I feel like I'm able to handle the world because my heart and my brain have trained themselves to respond to these things on the page. It's not real, but it is real. What better could you get from that than those two things at once?
The last time we talked, you compared fiction writing to professional wrestling. I thought that was such a great comparison.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Can you tell us what you meant by that?
I try to talk to my students. I'm realizing no one really cares about professional wrestling in the way that I do. It's a thing I've loved since I was a kid. And like fiction and professional wrestling, like one of the things, if you tell people you love professional wrestling, most people, the first thing that they want to tell you is, well, you know that's not real, right? It's fake. And I don't know. I don't know what the glee is about telling you that. It's not like when you watch movies or read a book. It's not like people are constantly telling, like, you know that's scripted, right? That's all just made up by somebody. I don't care. And one of the things I love about professional wrestling is how much it leans into what is real and what is not. And just like fiction, I think professional wrestling is that moment where you know it's not real and you know that somebody long before this match took place has determined who's going to win and who's going to lose, right? But you're watching it, and if the two people telling the story are good enough, you stop thinking about that. You absolutely do not care that this is fictional, that it's made up, that it's predetermined. Your heart is responding to the emotion of what they are putting into that scene, and that you will die if this person doesn't win. You do not care whether it's real or not. The outcome is going to change your life. And when I have really watched a wrestling match where you could tell me every 5 seconds someone could lean in and tell me this is all fake, I don't care, because in that moment, it's real to me and I love it. And that's how fiction works.
You can listen to the full hour-long conversation with local author Kevin Wilson and hear an excerpt from his latest book, Run for the Hills, on our daily show, This is Nashville. And thanks for listening to the Nash Villager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener-supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.
Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from the Hal Allen Clinic, specializing in minimally invasive robotic spine surgery and laser brain tumor surgery. For 40 years, the neurosurgeons of the Hal Allen Clinic have been national leaders in brain and spine surgery.